what is happening? The headlines here say that the French government has fallen, and yet Macron is still running around as a president, but I understand the prime minister's in trouble. I didn't even know there was a prime minister. Fill us in.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it. So, yeah, France is what we call a semi-presidential system. So this is the constitution of the Fifth Republic, which goes back to 1958, created for President Charles de Gaulle. Now, France, up until the Fifth Republic, so up until the 50s, was a parliamentary system where you had, normal parliamentary system like, we might have in the United Kingdom or Spain or Germany, where you have a prime minister that basically comes from, whatever majority can be cobbled together in the legislature. So France still has this parliamentary system, but since the creation of the Fifth Republic in 1958 under Charles de Gaulle, the great World War II hero, this kind of towering figure, France created this very strong presidency also that exists alongside the National Assembly and alongside the parliament. And so what we have today is both a president that's elected every 5 years now, and you also have a National Assembly that's elected that ultimately that the prime minister comes from whatever majority exists in the National Assembly. And so you have, the situation. It's only happened a few times before in French history, 3 times where we've had what we call cohabitation, a president who's not from the same party as the prime minister. But that's kind of the background on the system. But basically, to give you the very short version of what the crisis is today, is that, so Macron, of course, is still president, but back in this summer, after the European elections, he decided to dissolve the National Assembly. That's one of these very strong presidential powers that the French president has, again, under this constitution.
This is a power the king has in England, right?
There's people that call the French president, the system, the presidential monarchy. And, if you want to go back deeper in French history, we can talk about how maybe this presidential figure is kind of hearkening back to the figure of the king. When Macron talks about, his desire to have a Jupiterian presidency, in many ways is reflective of this kind of bigger tradition in France. I talk about Napoleon as well. In any case, so Macron dissolves the National Assembly this summer. And what happens then? We have new elections, and the left wins a slight plurality of votes, but you essentially have 3 evenly split blocks that emerge in the National Assembly. And so Macron, this tremendous self-inflicted wound, loses his relative majority in the National Assembly and throws France into political chaos. That's the first step of this. So dissolving the National Assembly, losing his majority in the Assembly. And then secondly, we have this kind of, mathematical problem where no party has a clear majority on its own. Macron, again, under the Constitution, can name the prime minister. And instead of naming a prime minister that reflected what voters expressed at the polls, which is to say the left and the center, voters unified to stop the far right from winning, Macron chose a prime minister hailing from the right wing, Michel Barnier, and Barnier's government essentially has fallen in the National Assembly to a motion of no confidence because he lost the support of not just the left, but also the far right. Again, these 3 blocks. We have 3 evenly split blocks today in France, and right now we're in a situation where the government is continuing to kind of pass day-to-day, managing day-to-day affairs, but we're still waiting now on Macron to name a new prime minister. And again, we're in this situation of just political paralysis, crisis, and it goes back to Macron's decision to dissolve the assembly in June.
Now, it seems to me, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of this, because you live in Europe and I haven't lived there since the 80s. And when I did, I lived in Germany. So I can, I was pretty well informed about German politics. But it seems to me that the 2 major forces that are shaping European politics right now and that are shifting Europe to the right generally are, number one, immigration of mostly brown Muslims, largely as a result of the Russian massive bombardment of Syria back in the day. And the essentially racist backlash to that. And neoliberalism, the immiseration, the impoverishment of working people and the reduction of the power of unions and the increase in the power of corporations and the very, very wealthy. Is that what's going on in France? And do you agree with that analysis of Europe in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing these challenges appear across Europe. I think certainly in France, we've seen both of these things play out, and I think they go a long way in explaining the kind of political crisis that we're in today. We've had, to be clear, the neoliberalism, if we want to use that word, isn't as strong as it is in the United States. But France, to give you an example, and this is broadly true across Europe. We're talking about, states that have more developed welfare states than the United States. But you want to take France in particular, public services have always been essential. The state has played a significant role in providing housing, transport, education. We've had pretty high quality public services in France for decades. And what we've seen is sort of a slow decline in the quality of those public services because of certain political choices made by the governing elites. And that goes back to even the socialists in the 1980s, which governed France, which instead of delivering on the more kind of progressive aspects of their platform, ultimately decided to have a more authoritarian restrictive approach to the budget. So declining public services are a big part of it. The economy, the economic growth is lower in Europe and France than it is in the United States, for instance. But then, of course, we can't really only talk about the economy. We have to talk about the backlash to immigration, and the backlash, that's amplified also by these economic problems. Parties on the populist far right that are able to capitalize on this widespread sense of frustration against the political establishment. But also, this very anti-immigrant rhetoric, unfortunately, captures a lot of support. And I've spent the last as I'm reporting right now on another book project, spent a lot of time talking to voters who support the far-right National Rally in France, which is, one of the three big blocs competing for power. And it's hard to isolate those two factors you talked about. They interact with one another in complex ways, just like they do in the United States. So we have a real hollowing out of France's economy, decline of public services, but also, like you said, there is a real backlash and dog whistle type rhetoric that we see directed at immigrants that want to seek to blame immigration for the kind of problems that France is experiencing today.
The other thing